In this episode, I had the opportunity to chat with Lee Edwards. He is a VC at Root Ventures, which is a seed stage fund focused on investing in hard tech startups. So we talk about Lee's progression, both as a technologist and as a VC. We discuss how he goes about identifying companies, some of the big themes in the data landscape right now, including the bundling or unbundling of services and products. We talk about what makes a great VC, and along the way, we have fun getting into kind of what else he's up to, including being a wine sommelier. So hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was a lot of fun chatting with Lee. He's a very smart person who I highly respect. So enjoy. Lee, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for deciding to join the Data Nerd Herd today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, so Lee Edwards, I'm a partner at Root Ventures. We're a seed stage firm in San Francisco focused on what we call hard tech. So there's four of us, and we're all engineers, and we invest in areas that we know. So, for example, Chrissy on our team was the engineering program manager for the first Apple Watch and generation of iPod Touch and iPod Nano. Yeah, awesome. And she actually doesn't wear one, which is kind of funny. But
That's hilarious.
And she was also ran hardware for the Square Reader. So she does a lot in hardware, wearables, consumer hardware. Kane does a lot of industrial stuff, like what other people call boring industry. Kane finds like really just nerdy fascinating. And Avidan does a lot of embedded systems. He was the first investor in Particle, which a lot of people know is like sort of the hardware hacking kit, but it's also used in a lot of like big enterprise. And then I focus in pure software. So I'm interested in developer tools and software infrastructure. I kind of just use dev tools to mean the whole umbrella of things from MongoDB and Snowflake to Red Hat to Twilio to anything that engineers are using. And I'm also interested in kind of like interesting applications of machine learning and AI. We're a seed stage fund. We do sort of $1 to $2 million size checks. Next year, expect that to be more like $2 to $3 million size checks, and not afraid to be kind of the first investor or like anywhere along the seed stage.
That's awesome. That is a deep bench too. That you have for four people. That's insane. That's like the Avengers or something.
Yeah, and we just added a principal, Emily, who comes from SpaceX and Tesla, and not like feeling out what her area is going to be, but she just led an investment in a space tech company that's actually space software. It's really cool.
Really?
I can't talk about it yet, I think.
Sure, yeah. That's space. Well, I have to think about that one too.
Software in space.
That is a different problem than I've probably ever had to think about, or probably you. So
exactly.
That's awesome. I mean, let's kind of rewind back to the start. I mean, how did you get into the tech and data field in the first place? Everyone kind of has their journeys into this space. I don't think everyone I've met who's been interesting in the space they always have an interesting story of how they got into the space. So
yeah. So, I mean, software in general, I was always just into computers and stuff, and was, playing around with QBasic when I was 13 and writing programs and trading them on floppies with my friends and programming the calculator, just like, making text adventure games, like classic stories. And then went to school at Olin College, where I studied systems engineering and did a little bit of everything. When I was at iRobot, I was a mechanical engineer, mechanical design. And I realized that I was a terrible mechanical engineer. I went to Pivotal to do software. And left to join a startup called SideTour as the first engineer, and we building kind of Airbnb experiences, except without Airbnb's distribution. So slightly smaller audience, and we were acquired by Groupon, and ran a few teams at Groupon. They were doing more of service-oriented architecture. Kind of we were moving from Rails to like sort of SOA. And doing some like real-time ticketing events, like the Ticketmaster and VA stuff. So then I left to be actually joined Teespring as the director of engineering, and then became VP engineering and CTO. And when I became CTO, I inherited the data team and didn't know anything at all about it. So I basically went on like a whirlwind of like talking to a lot of my friends who were doing this stuff, and basically we just had one data team, and it was a mix of data engineers and data scientists and data analysts. And so tried to bone up on this while, definitely hiring a head of data, who we hired, Nick Morrill, who came directly out of Coastal Ventures, actually, as an analyst there.
Interesting.
And so basically I was sort of, really like kind of trusting the leadership, in these different functions. And I think one of the very first things that I did was, really want to like clean up the data infrastructure and look at. We were a company, and I think this will be relevant to some of the stuff we're talking about. We were a company as an early startup that was just like classic rapid growth startup story, where it's two kids in college, cool idea, for designing t-shirts online, and it exploded and grew faster than they could ever imagine. So they're writing Ruby scripts to move data from the Postgres database to the Redshift, and you just have a bucket of Ruby scripts that you run every night, and then you change a column and you have to tell the guy that runs the Ruby scripts, and he changes the Ruby script. So we're like, we basically were like, okay, yeah, turns out other people are doing this ETL thing. We should probably learn about that and do it. And everyone was kind of like learning as they went.
Classic problem, I'm sure. So
Yeah.
Teespring's a good app, by the way. My kids use Teespring a lot. They like to make a merch, as they call it.
Oh, that's awesome.
They're like 8 and 10 years old.
Oh my God. I would love to see a link to their designs. What kinds of stuff are they doing?
They take my iPad and they draw pictures on it and they upload it. And they make t-shirts. So it's pretty hilarious.
Have they had any buyers?
I don't think so, just them.
Send me a link. I'll buy one.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I obviously collect these things. I have a kind of an insane closet of ridiculous and usually they're like really weird ones.
Oh,
also,
wow.
Sometimes when we would take some down for like content violations, I would print one real quick and then take it down.
Oh, that's smart. That's awesome. So yeah, I mean, so you're doing kind of homegrown ETL and all that stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
How did you guys, I guess, what was the learning curve like in terms of adopting better practices and sort of, I guess, becoming a professional data team?
Well, there was a lot of appetite to do it. I mean, I think, we definitely did bring in some people with, enormous experience. That sort of the most senior data engineer, was, dyed in the wool, like Kafka Zookeeper, just, really, really deep stuff. And then the more junior members of the team were people that came from product engineering and they thought this was interesting, or they came from, one of them came from analytics and wanted to eventually move into software engineering, like product engineering, and sort of use the data engineering thing as a transition. His first project was actually to kind of stand up our Airtable, or sorry, Airflow.
Interesting.
And yeah, I mean, we're pretty lucky. I mean, one of the things that's pretty great about being out in the Valley is like, I was just like, hey, why don't we just go get lunch with the Airflow team, and kind of got an intro to them. And we went and got lunch and we were like, here's what we're thinking about doing. Like, you think this is like a good use case? How would you host this thing? And yeah, we did a lot of that. I met with one of the early data security guys at Square to kind of help me out with some of the stuff. Yeah, met with the head of data at Slack and just tried to learn a lot about also how to just manage this team. Like even product engineering, it's a little different, right? It's like you have agile, like agile stories and like estimates and, sprint planning and all this stuff. And none of it's perfect, but there's a lot of theory and thinking about how to run a product engineering team. And on the data side, it's like, well, what's a data science sprint? What's a sprint on building a neural network when we don't even know if that's like the right architecture for this? And like, so yeah, there's just a lot. It was a lot to learn. And I think being at a startup where everyone was sort of, let's wear lots of hats, like let's take this as a growth opportunity. It was just really exciting and fun to work with people like that.
That's really cool. That's a really cool experience. And so you did that, and working as an operator, in a company. But then you switch into VC. I mean, what was that transition like? How'd that happen?
Yeah, so basically, I had been angel investing in a couple of friends' companies, and then I was close with the folks at Bloomberg Beta. If you know them, Karen Klein, Roy Bahat, James Cham, and they put me in a program that they had where I was sort of a scout. It was kind of an early sort of scout program, and was just sort of using it to invest in my friends' companies opportunistically, folks, generally like folks coming out of Olin or former coworkers, and then just kind of like really enjoyed it and started spending weekends. Like when I got to the transition from like, okay, I'm passively investing to like, I'm seeking out opportunities. And then a lot of my coffees before work and like my lunches and then like my dinners were taken up with like talking to founders. And yeah, I just kind of started really loving what I was doing and figured that at some point I would want to sort of do it professionally. And then I think Teespring got to a point where the opportunity kind of made sense, that I could sort of move on, and do this. So I was investing on my own, kind of starting to start my own fund, and that I set really aggressive goals because I didn't want to sort of spend like 2 or 3 years, sort of going nowhere with it. And I got a few commitments. I'm like really grateful to those people, and it never really got to sort of where it needed to be. And right around that time, happened to meet Root when we co-invested in a company called Esper. At the time it was called Shunya, now it's called Esper, which is sort of a enterprise Android operating system and cloud services. So if you want to sort of make like digital signage or software that runs on like a point of sale system or like touchscreen ordering, or like in a car or like a touchscreen on an elevator, like anywhere that you see a deployed device. Right now, Windows is the #1 operating system for this. And the founder, Yadu, was one of the early architects of Windows CE. So he's in cloud services at Amazon. So it's sort of the Android, sort of the Android choice for this problem. It works on ARM, and I don't know if we've announced this yet. I don't know why we wouldn't, but supporting x86 now, which I think might be the first, if not the first, it's one of the first successful Android x86 implementations out there.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I met Root this way, and we obviously like really gelled on this, and we're just starting to deploy Fund 2, which was twice the size of Fund 1, and hiring partners. And the thesis was exactly the same as the thing that I was going to pursue on my own. And then I got to work with some partners that I think are really complementary. Even looking at like hardware, consumer hardware, and hard industry, they all software works with all these things. So we're constantly talking to each other about kind of the overlaps that we're seeing in these different.
What is the thesis at Root?
Yeah, the general idea, we call it hard tech, and I think, yeah, it kind of depends on what you mean by thesis, I guess. The reason that we exist, the thesis for like Root existing, I think, is that we believe there's a whole category of companies where technology sort of engineering risk and roadmap is sort of first. And founders will want to work, we hope founders will want to work with VCs that are still current on engineering. So we don't really call ourselves former engineers. I write code almost every week. I have lots of side projects, and cool. Avidan's always hacking stuff on the vending machine and coffee machine. And Chrissy actually put the NFC chips in our coasters. So we try to stay current. Cool. And I think that's, people would always tell me that. They were like, well, you won't be, if you think your value add is being an operator, the longer that you're a VC, you won't be an operator, you'll get out of date. And I'm just trying desperately to make sure that that's not the case.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, what do you think do you think there's an advantage to having been an operator or currently serving as one in whatever capacity, even if it's putting chips in the coasters and stuff? I mean, yeah. But I guess being close to the tech, right? That's what I'm trying to get at. Being close to the problem space. Do you think that helps or hurts as a VC?
I obviously think it helps. I think in a number of different ways. I think one is, this is a very competitive landscape, and anything you can do that sort of helps founders choose you will make you sort of successful as a VC. And I think I can kind of gel with founders in a certain way that what it is when you're like talking tech with other tech people versus when you're talking tech with a finance person. It's like a different dynamic. Not to knock on them, right?
Yeah. Well, your website alone is like the nerdiest site I've seen in a long time. So I think I emailed you about that. It's like, yeah, congrats. I think you win the prize. For the audience, it's a command line. You should go check it out. What's the URL?
It's root.vc.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a command line implemented in JavaScript that has lots and lots of Easter eggs. And I think there's sort of like two kinds of users. So I have it hooked up to Google Analytics, and like there are people that type ls like almost the instant that it's loaded, and then there are people that like read the help text and it says to type help. And yeah, I think it's interesting. There's the reflex to just literally type ls and ignore all the text that tells you to type help.
Yeah, I was that guy. I hit ls.
Totally.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a command line, duh. Like,
Yeah, exactly. So we definitely hid some stuff in like the files that are there. But so yeah, I think it helps there. But then I also think it helps in terms of like at the seed stage, a lot of companies, you're building roadmap and like what's the right roadmap to build, and can I like really understand the product. I think a lot of the really, I mean, there's amazing investors with every kind of background. So I'm not saying that non-technical background is bad per se, but like I mean, a lot of times I think we're the board member that understands the product the deepest. A lot of times I've used the product. For daily.co is a company that we work with where I've actually built 2 products using the Daily API. It's a real-time video communication API.
oh yeah, I remember using that when we were doing one of our calls. It was like, what is this app?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it looks different. Everyone feels like they've seen everything because they're like, this isn't Google Meet or Hangouts or Zoom. Like, what is this?
Yeah, no, it felt familiar, but then I started looking. I was like, it has a GitHub logo on it or something. This isn't familiar.
Right.
What is this? Yeah, so I dug into that. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I noticed that this was little things I picked up on that it kind of gave you a sense of legitimacy to tech knowledge, where I would say other investors, it's not a right or wrong. Again, and it's
Totally.
I think for somebody like me who might raise money at some point, I don't know, but it's like I want to just see what's out there, see what the philosophy is, the approach too, like who's going to be able to help where, right? If we got multiple investors, like is it just dumb money or is it like hyper smart nerdy money? I don't know.
Totally.
So
well, and I think like a lot of times we invest with a lot of folks downstream from us, Series A, B, and C investors that are more like the go-to-market investors for that particular kind of go-to-market. So I think a lot of times, and this isn't a bad thing, but by the time you're sort of like Series C, Series D, you're at $3, $4, $5, $6 million in revenue, and you're trying to get to 10, 15, 20 as your next step. And like, honestly, there's amazing VCs there that just don't care what you're selling. It's like, right. Here's how to build a sales org. Here's how you incentivize an inside sales team. Here's a connection to a bunch of VP sales. And so they can kind of do that because we sort of, things are hard tech when we invest. And then at some point, they're software that people buy or services that people buy. And the tech is more de-risked than it was coming in.
Sure. Yeah. I suppose at later stages too, it's more like I'm just buying a security at this point.
Totally. So, well, there's this saying that every equities investor believes that the people who come before them are gamblers and the people that come after them are spreadsheet jockeys. So like, no matter where you sit, I think that's true. So when we sit the earliest as possible, I guess I don't believe anyone else is a gambler except for maybe NFT people, but
that's pretty hilarious.
Yeah. And then I guess I would say the other thing that I think there's an advantage is in terms of picking. I tend to have opinions about how software feels. If I try someone's API, if I try their command line interface, if I try their like dashboard, I'm really big on like, does this feel right to me? Like, are the abstractions correct? And obviously there can be a lot of different levels of abstraction that can work if the market's big enough, right? You can have AWS and Heroku. Obviously AWS is way bigger, right? But sometimes some kinds of customers sort of want something a little lower level. And sometimes people are like, I want the Heroku for X. I want the thing I don't know anything about this. I want to type a command and be done with it. So yeah, just kind of feeling that out. I almost view it as like maybe the way consumer investors are. I kind of, landed myself in a little bit of hot water on Twitter, as I often do. And I said something about like the top consumer investors out there, they're all users of this stuff. When you talk to the very, very top consumer investors, like they're aware of trends, they have opinions about UX, and they do use like social apps all the time.
Right.
developer tools have a go-to-market strategy that is more and more resembling consumer already. I think there's brand within developer tools. Engineers think of the brand of things. They maybe don't consciously think of the brand of things, but if you tell them Java, they have a reaction, right? If you say Ruby, they have a reaction.
Yeah.
IntelliJ or Vim, Xcode, right? Like that's an element of like consumer brand, and these are the people that are making decisions, bringing products into the enterprise.
Sure.
It's typically not the CTO telling. There are some exceptions, but typically the CTO is not coming around to everyone's desk and being like, "We're using VS Code from now on," right? Maybe there are certain companies that are like this, but yeah, and considering that the bottoms-up consumer-looking motion is the thing that's powerful, I think having an understanding of developer tools as a consumer is helpful. So that I'm always playing with stuff, even that's too late for me to invest in. I've been playing with DBT lately, not because I could ever invest in it at this point, maybe post IPO, but because I want to understand, sort of
Right.
what everyone else is experiencing.
That's really cool, though. First principles thinking is something I really do appreciate. I do this a lot with my company too, because we are literally a data engineering consulting firm. Therefore, we have to evaluate the whole suite of the universe of tools out there. And we'll talk about the plethora of tools in a second. But yeah, even for me, who's, I think supposedly supposed to be detached from a lot of day-to-day stuff, I still want to dig in, understand how the tech works, right? Because finding the best of breed partners, for example, we partner with a lot of companies. Like that's the only way. I can't just take the marketing salesperson's word for it. Like, oh, our product's awesome and it does everything. Like if it did that, like, reputation would be screwed, right? Because now we're recommending products and implementing stuff that's like may not be the best fit. So
totally,
yeah, especially these days too. I mean, there's so many data products out there right now. I mean, what's your take on that too? Like the explosion of data tools out there. I mean, it wasn't this way all the time. I'd wager back in the days when you're doing Teespring and stuff, it wasn't like it is today, where it's just, I don't even know how many data tools there are right now. Do you?
I don't. I mean, I think every now and then, VC firms or individual VCs will put out these like industry map, market map things. And there's a couple cool ones. There's one I think Battery does, and then Matt Turk does one that he's been doing for a long time. And Bloomberg Beta did one for a while that Siobhan Zillis was doing until she left. Yeah, I mean, that's bigger every year. It's, you could zoom out and all the logos are tiny. Yeah, I think there has been an explosion. I think there are some good reasons for that. When we look at, we look at tools for engineers of all kinds, like as a firm broadly. We have, Particle is sort of a developer tool for hardware developers, and Topology is a company that we invested in that's sort of the next generation of mechanical CAD. So they do sort of generative CAD software where you define constraints rather than drawings. And it generates 3D solids that you can only really manufacture with additive manufacturing and
that's pretty cool.
Advanced materials. So I mentioned that because I think when you look at like mechanical engineers building tooling, there's also a book Kane recommended to me that I have, it's on my desk. I can't remember the title of this, or maybe look it up and put it in the notes, but there's a book that basically explains how we got from like rocks to being able to send things into space. Like, how do you wrap your head around the idea that we've increased the precision of tools? Doesn't it seem like you should only be able to decrease the precision of the tool? Like, how do you like sharpen something to cut something more precisely than the knife was itself? And so mechanical engineers have built mechanical tools forever, and software engineers have built software engineering tools forever. Electrical engineers have built lots of EE tools, right? These like benchtop setups and oscilloscopes and multimeters. So I think we're getting to the point where we're building a lot of software for these other disciplines. I think it seems, data engineering, data science, data analysis is much, much closer to software engineering than electrical and mechanical are. So I think those are further out, but we're now kind of seeing software engineers having sort of like, I think, created some insights around how to build software best. And those insights are kind of spreading.
It seems to be. Like, I don't know what your take is, but I feel like the data space is about 10 years behind where software engineering is, maybe more, maybe less. I don't know.
Yeah.
whatever the margin of error is on that. But it seems like the adoption curve is going to be quicker just because you have some context, right? Software engineers had to make this stuff up as they're going along. Agile, which actually celebrates its 20th anniversary of being signed just up the road from me.
Funny.
Yeah, Snowbird, of all
Yeah,
places.
yeah.
So Agile, right? I mean, that was
Yep.
new back in 2001. And then you had DevOps, and now you have data ops and
Yep.
analytics engineering, data engineering, all these things which weren't terms back in even 2010.
Totally.
So
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's like, yeah, I try to never say things like, I guess I probably agree with you, but I try to never sort of say like data engineering's behind software engineering, because it's like a bias of my own background.
Sure.
And I think information kind of flows in both directions. Like Agile, for example, drew heavily on lean manufacturing, which was
it did.
Toyota's in the 80s and 90s
Yeah.
process. So yeah, I mean I think these technical fields inspire each other for sure, but I think there are certain things like we obvious plug for Superconductor, which makes great expectations. So root portfolio company that I think the reason I was really excited from basically day zero was I'm a huge fan of test. Like anyone who knows anything about Pivotal software, Pivotal Labs, we are big believers in the test first, almost like sort of zealots. I think people describe us as zealots actually a lot. So write the test, write the code, write the test, write the code. And I think not everyone does test-driven development or behavior-driven development, and that's fine. But the value of the tests, whether you write them before or after, is very obvious to me as documentation. As sometimes the first thing I read, if I know that a repo has really good tests, I will usually read the tests before I read the code in the comments.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think that to me sort of suggests this problem in data that everyone has sort of treated as unsolvable of data quality, right? I think we will often, and it's not just analysts and data scientists that deal with data, right? Product engineers deal with data. I used to deal with data all the time, and you're just like, you have these fundamental questions of like, what does this column mean? Oh, well, it says cost. Is that cents or dollars or yen? And the time is UTC. Like those ones are maybe a little more obvious, but you start to get into things like, oh, well, LTV. How do we calculate lifetime value? Are we using the cost from this table or like the cost from this table? And everyone's sort of throwing their hands up and they're like, look, it's just a hard part of the job. It's just, you're just going to spend a lot of time answering those questions. That's just friction that's part of it that's necessary. And I think sometimes when you think of a problem that way, maybe there's a solution out there that kind of beats the learned helplessness. And I'm kind of hoping that's what Great Expectations is, because I've seen tests do that in software. We used to say that in software. It used to be like, bugs are just part of it. You're going to spend all your time debugging. But then when you join an organization and you start bringing software test into the culture, you notice that time spent on bugs goes down. And it used to feel like an unsolvable problem. So I'm very optimistic that this can be done with data.
I'm bullish on Great Expectations too. Actually, I remember it's been almost 3 years ago, maybe 4, I can't remember which. So I think a lot of it spawned here in Salt Lake, actually. My buddy Taylor Miller, who's on the core team there, I remember he started working on Great Expectations, and he described it to me at one of my Python meetups that they run, and he's like, yeah, it's like data tests. Like, what? That's weird.
Right.
That's cool. Tell me more.
Right.
And so he told me more. I was like, okay, this is awesome. This is cool. Keep doing this. So, and apparently they kept doing it. So, but yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because when I heard it too, it clicked automatically. It's like, I get it. Like, keep doing that. So,
yeah, hopefully I think the plan is to keep doing it for quite a while. So
I think so.
Until everyone's doing it.
Well, it's a problem that I'd seen in data for, I've been in data for almost 20 years now. It's the kind of stuff you'd always see, like your report's wrong. This is CEO telling you this usually.
Right. In
a meeting with a bunch of other people.
Right.
Like, oh, that number doesn't look right.
Right.
It's like, fuck. Okay, thanks. So, that was how you
that feedback right now.
That's how you test data back then, though. You send a report out and people would just dissect it, usually in a live meeting with a bunch of other people. So it's an expensive meeting where the data's wrong. Congratulations. So
Right.
I mean, that was literally how it was tested for years. Or to your point, what is LTV? I don't know. What do you think it is? And the longer these definitions went without, I think, a concrete definition company wide, everyone just sort of adopted their own entropy version of a definition to the point where I remember one client or one place I used to work, actually, a big e-commerce company. I was like, so what is a customer? We brought in sales, marketing, finance, everybody, big, the C levels and directors. And nobody knew. There's many definitions of a customer as there were people in the room.
Yep. Yep.
Ultimately, it's like, well, I guess we're not going to figure this out. So.
It's kind of funny, right? Because when you're talking about the proliferation of data tools, I think there's a lot of people that look at all these problems and think of different solutions. So there's a lot of companies working on sort of the metric store kind of idea. There's a lot of folks working on like anomaly detection in data, whether that's automated or ML based or human reviewed or lots of different solutions, right? And I think just sort of my, I guess, personality or my culture as a software engineer is to sort of be attracted to the idea of deliberately writing tests and making that a practice of the team, like an investment that you're making in your own data quality. That's different from documentation, right? Because I think I've been successful at bringing testing into software engineering culture many times. I've never been successful at bringing documentation culture into a software team. For lots of reasons, right? The documentation goes stale. It doesn't feel necessary. There's no real check that it's there and that it's good. Like maybe you could make a rule that like you have to have a certain ratio of lines of code to lines of comment and check that at GitHub commit time or something. But like all of that's unnatural and doesn't seem likely to work. Whereas if you sort of culturally enforce, hey, every time that we change the business logic, the tests need to pass. We need to change the test. If we write something and there's no test, we write the test. And so potentially there's something like that on the data side.
It's going to be a big shift, though, I think, for a lot of kind of ingrained data operators, for sure. Because it's not natural. It's like it's almost like writing documentation.
Yeah,
but it's foreign, like data tests. I would do this a lot, like just simple counts and stuff, null checks and all that kind of stuff before before and after pipeline loads. But this stuff you have to do in SQL. There weren't tests per se. And so,
right. I mean, I think that, and software test frameworks are the same way, right? Like so another funny like quirk of Pivotal. Some people know Pivotal because they were the authors of Jasmine, JavaScript testing framework. I'll probably get the name wrong, but one of the Objective-C ones. Gosh, I can't remember the name of it. And then they did it again for Go. And basically it was like, we can't write software, we can't work unless we can write tests. And so when we started writing iOS apps before we built the library, we were just using asserts. So I mean, that's what a testing framework is, right? It basically is abstractions on top of assert,
right.
or if statements. It's helpful if it's a functional programming language and you can kind of like define this as a lambda and pass it in, and then it returns like a Boolean or whatever. But that tends to be how these are architected. But the ability to doing the abstraction makes it easier to write the test and not think about how you're implementing it. You're literally just writing the configuration. Like, maybe it's a YAML file, like in the case of superconductive, right? It's like configuration more than code. You're sort of, you can kind of bang it out. So yeah, I guess I could talk about superconductive for an hour, but the I think like the broader the point I was trying to make a minute ago is I think there are a lot of different ways to solve problems like this. Like we've all sort of recognized that data quality is a problem, and like where is the biggest problem? Is it when the data is at rest? And so should we be building things that sort of find anomaly detection in data at rest, or is it when the data is in motion? So like we need to kind of put our tests in the middle of like ELT or in the middle of ETL or in the middle of like real-time data pipelines. And so, DBT has some really great features built in around data quality for that. So I think that's the reason we're seeing it. And that's really, I'm only talking about data quality, which is maybe, 5% of the puzzle of all the stuff that's out there. We've also got model delivery and, model explainability, and we've got, all kinds of questions in data infrastructure, like, ETL and ELT and real-time data pipelines and data warehouses and specialized databases like real-time databases and graph databases, and there's a million things, and they all, I think we haven't settled on it. It's not a, I would say that it's probably safe to say that React and React-based frameworks have sort of won for the time being in the JavaScript front-end world. And that could change, it could definitely change. It has changed in the past. But I would say that it's a relatively stable ecosystem at this point, but it wasn't always. For years and years and years, there were always three of them, and one would die and another would pop up. And data's in that transitional space. And I don't think that necessarily means that each of these problems that's out there is only going to have one winner. But I do think it settles.
How do you think it settles?
Yeah, that's the $1 billion question. I guess that's
100 billion probably. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. Easily. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm a believer in the idea of like, when I say like, I'll say like DevOps is going away or like data engineering is going away, and like sometimes pisses people off, but I don't necessarily mean like the job and the discipline will go away, but more that like things that we used to do for DevOps that used to be really, really hard have like become free. And now data engineers are working on problems like container orchestration and stuff. That's just like, it's just like many, many, many levels of complexity over the old days of just like, how do I get a log out of a server, which is like basically solved. And so I guess I view things like that. I think that we will always move towards anyone that's standing up a piece of software of any kind in the organization should be able to provision their own data resources, their own data pipelines. They should be able to draw on all the data that exists in the world, whether that's whatever you want to call it, a data lake or a data warehouse, and then produce that data for other people to consume. And we're going to get away from this world of, I need to file a ticket with the data engineering team. The data engineering team comes and asks me my requirements. The product engineers come and talk to me and say like, oh, you're actually changing a column that the web app depends on, so you need to do a migration. And like that is has to go away. It's pure friction. Right? I
think a lot of friction is going away in data engineering in general. At least that's the realm I'm in. Totally. But I think it's because of abstraction. So it's interesting because you bring up Kubernetes. I think that's a good step forward. But you're also just seeing, I think, a lot of really simplified tools. Snowflake, for example. When I in the early days of my data career, I was like, in 2010s, for example, there have been many generations, but I'd say when I started getting to like ML engineering, before it was like a thing, so I had to software engineer ML stuff back in the day. That was like when Hadoop was around. And so you had to focus on, these big clustered systems, but distributed systems that were complicated. And you had to manage that. You didn't get the luxury of talking about data quality, right? Other stuff, right? It's like, well, my Hadoop cluster's on fire right now, so I'm going to deal with that. And Spark comes along, I think simplifies things. At least it makes it faster. I think abstracts things. And now, I started using Spark, 2014? I don't use Spark. I haven't used Spark for years. It's like, why? For most things, I use SQL. Yeah. I can use Snowflake and BigQuery and get things done like way, way quicker. And so I'm starting to see this with other data engineers too, where I think there was a kind of a machismo of using like the Hadoop stack and MapReduce and look at my cool Java code. That's kind of an oxymoron, but gonna get a lot of hate mail now. Oh well.
But I mean, it works if you were talking literally about coffee. You could always use that.
Right. Yes, coffee. Yeah. But now, everything's so abstracted. Like with BigQuery, I just give it my data and just do my thing, right? I don't need to set up infrastructure. This is the way I see everything going, and at least in the world I'm in, doing data engineering every day. It's like the stacks I see are becoming more and more abstracted away from kind of heavy lifting, macho heroics to just, data, put it in, do your thing. Now you can start talking about stuff like data quality, governance, enterprisey stuff that I think was more constrained to big blue chip companies before, that's now filtering down to startups. You want to do data quality and do data tests? Go for it. Right. That is cool. That did not exist even 5 years ago. So
yeah, and I think these folks are just going to be working on harder and harder problems. Like, I think there's a lot of stuff that's relatively early. It's I'm just going to keep plugging the companies I work with. If that's
go for it. Yeah.
So like, so Maraxa is
Maraxa. So
oh, you know them?
Yeah. Forrest, a friend of mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So they, yeah, when I was talking about sort of how products feel, like Devaris used to run, or he was a director in developer experience, like on the product side at Heroku. So it is kind of a keen sense for this stuff. And the idea is that it would be sort of Heroku for real-time streaming. So maybe it's like Heroku for Debezium or Heroku for Kafka is maybe one way to think about it. Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of going to be lots of use cases for folks that want to, really like go deep and like configure Debezium, use Zookeeper and mess with Kafka, I guess. I think there probably theoretically are people that need to do that, but there's probably a big fat group of people that really just don't need that.
They don't.
And so, yeah, then I would love to see those engineers applied to sort of problems that are more core to the business or very, very particular need that's differentiating.
Yeah, it's something I've been writing about a lot too. Just this data engineering book I'm writing. It's kind of like the abstraction occurring. It's who was it? Abe actually from Superconductive. He asked me on a hike one day. And it's like, so why are you writing a data engineering book when everything's changing right now? Like, how is that possible? And it's like, well, right. Focus on the life cycle of data and data engineering. Don't focus on the tools. So don't write like the next Spark book. Like that's stupid.
Right.
Because that's a shelf life, right? But if you zoom out, focus on the undercurrents as well. Like, I think we identified like orchestration, data management, which is a huge discipline, and other things as being like the undercurrents of the entire data engineering lifecycle. Like that, I think is focusing on the lifecycle management is going to be more and more key. You can just plug and play tools. There's a lot of great tools out there. So many, we don't even know the number of them. Right. And there'll be more and more of them. And so I think the whole notion is design for reversible decisions and just plug and play best of breed as they come out. So I don't know. I don't know what the next DBT is. I know there's going to be something else out there. That's just how it goes. So, but
yeah, I mean, I think there's another way to slice when you kind of think about different players that survive and are big enough in different verticals. I think another way to think about it is sort of the bundling and unbundling, or often kind of call it like Apple versus Android. There are folks that want to provide sort of all-in solutions where you don't need to use anything else. And that's great for a lot of people. They want to show up. They want to not think about it. They want to just do it. Just do Heroku and use Heroku Postgres and use Heroku Redis and just, I'm done. And then there are people that really want to plug and play. And if you take the consumer analogy again, there's different kinds of consumers, right? There's some people that love Android and want to use Android, and some people that love Apple and want to use Apple, and they want to use Apple Music and Apple Fitness and Apple TV Plus and Apple everything. And there's people that are, no, I want to customize, I want to modularize, I'm willing to spend my time on this. So
who's the Apple in that space then? Would it be like AWS's suite of tools, or what are you thinking along those lines?
Yeah, I guess there's an analogy with I'm calling them the cloud oligopolies now. I don't know who I stole that from, but I think it's like by far the best.
That's awesome.
I actually think in a way it might be kind of the opposite of like the so AWS, right, does provide sort of like a tool for everything, and they would love for you to stay inside their walled garden, but they don't make it that hard to leave the walled garden. It's not really very walled. It's just kind of a garden, right? Lots of people mix AWS with Snowflake or AeraDB or things like that. I would tend to think of it more as, I think Snowflake is a bit of an Apple approach to an enterprise data warehouse. I can see DBT moving in this direction. I always kind of speculate about this, and I guess now I'm on a video and people can poke holes in me if I'm wrong, but I tend to think that DBT wants to kind of do this. It seems like they're adding a lot of stuff. And maybe they're taking a slightly different approach where, say, like you use DBT's testing framework if you're just really simple needs. And then they do have a plugin for Superconductive that actually is community contributed. And yeah, maybe that's the way that you sort of get to go under the hood a little more, which in like maybe a purist, Apple analogy, there's a lot less going under the hood that you can do.
It's kind of like the App Store in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So another I would say is like weights and biases, right? I think weights and biases is kind of expanding horizontally. Algorithmia, right, is a great example. Very, very Apple-y ecosystem. They would want you to be, at least.
Yeah, I always think about this because in the old days you had Informatica, and I think you could basically just take Informatica and slice the product, and you have startups, lots of
Yeah,
them,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, but then I'm like, well, but it seems like with this, it's sort of the bundling approach. You kind of get back to a modern day Informatica, whether you like it or not. You can call it
Right,
something else, but at the end of the day, it's basically what it is.
right.
So,
Yeah, I mean the joke about the only ways to make money are bundling and unbundling makes it kind of sound like this is a useless cycle, or no. But I actually think the insight is different. Is that there are different kinds of customers. Some people want
yeah,
bundling and some people want unbundling. And I think yeah, every problem that exists that's going to be solved is going to have bundled and unbundled solutions.
right. Yeah, it's like every industry, I guess, right? Like cars and consumer
Totally.
electronics. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
same thing. Just where devs and dev tools are supposedly different, but really, yeah, I think you're right. Though, interesting insight because it does come back to kind of consumer behavior and products. Really, it's at the end of the day, I think you're right. These aren't that much different at all. People buy things. That's
Yeah.
that's pretty simple. So
Totally. Yeah, and I think just like consumer products, we often have a lot of identity wrapped up in it. Like very,
yeah,
very few engineers would sort of, I think, would recognize this, or like well, maybe a lot of engineers would do push back on me when I say this, but yeah, we have a lot of identity tied up in stuff, right? If you care about
tons.
Vim versus Emacs, if you care about tabs versus spaces, if you have a preference between, two languages that are pretty similar,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that's a consumer preference is maybe the way I would describe that.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's brand driven. Maybe, I to be honest, I refuse to try. I've been a Vim user for a long, long time. I refuse to try VS Code for a long, long time because it's Microsoft and Microsoft developer. I think somewhere in my subconscious, I had a negative brand association with Microsoft for developers.
Right.
And at some point I tried it and I was like, actually, this is amazing.
Same
And it
thing.
flipped the bit for me. And so now I think I have a positive brand association with Microsoft and developers. I think the GitHub acquisition has a lot to do with that. I think Satya actually being technical and sort of making this a focus has had a lot to do with that. But yeah,
I mean, I
we're all
remember
people too. We're susceptible to this
right.
non-logical, emotional stuff.
It makes no sense at the end of the day, but it makes total sense, right? Yeah, I remember when a colleague of mine, she went to Microsoft several years ago to be a Python advocate, a Python developer relations person. And I was like, what? Why? I mean, she's very popular in the Python community, and
Yeah,
that was a smart move. Actually, that was a brilliant move because guess who else they hired recently? So
right.
the guy who wrote Python, right? So
Peter Venerason.
yeah, exactly. So I'm like,
Yeah.
but they've been killing it. Microsoft, I would say, I was telling somebody this the other day, they're like, oh, so I use Macs, you use Windows at all? I'm like, yeah, actually I do. It's weird. I use Windows too. So, and why? WSL is awesome. Windows, I would say from a developer
Yeah.
standpoint, they may be doing more than any other big company right now. I think that for making the developer experience better. And
Totally.
I would never have thought I would said that like 5 years ago. You would have that would have been like on like a outtake reel on a comedy show or something.
Right.
But
Exactly.
like for all of us probably, right? But now you're looking at VS Code. Like that is actually a really great tool.
I think
It's
it's better
great.
too. I mean, there's obviously huge examples of, Facebook has React and PyTorch, and Google has um, TensorFlow, and obviously plenty of other things. But yeah, it does feel like Microsoft is gunning towards a more cohesive, developer outreach, developer experience, as opposed to some of the I think Facebook and Google sort of have specific projects, some of which are open source,
Right.
some of which are open source in name only, like Android.
Right.
And, yeah, it's clearly a strategic direction. I think if you think about it like that, I think they're actually doing a better job executing it than the others, and they're capturing the value, right? I think Facebook capturing the value of React I think it's smart. It makes a lot of sense. It gives them credibility. It gives people a reason to want to work there. Yeah, it helps them a little bit, but Microsoft clearly captures way more dollar value.
Oh yeah.
Developer tools, and Amazon outside of AWS, right? There's not much, right? There's no
right.
huge Amazon sponsored open source project that's like the size of PyTorch.
No, they just take open source projects and do things with them. So
someone might hit me in the comments and be like, actually, you moron, you're forgetting this one, but anyway.
Yeah,
But there might be a couple, but I think
there's always a couple, right? And you always get the person bike shedding the one that you don't know about. And so, yeah, smash the comment button, whatever. Lee and I probably won't care. Yeah, and it's interesting too. I predict that actually Azure is going to be the biggest cloud when everything's said and done. For a few reasons. The developer experience is awesome, but the number of companies that you see, I call them dark matter companies. They're like the 90% of the companies in the universe that you don't ever hear about. They're very profitable. They have Windows on-prem data centers.
I like that name.
And they're going to go to Azure. Windows makes it so easy to port to Azure. It's like a click of a button. It's built in. So
totally.
Yeah, and again, maybe not the best user experience in Azure, but I think it's going to be the biggest one when everything's said and done. Just the sheer number of companies that will go to the cloud. They're setting the ground where it's dead simple. So, and also making licensing very onerous if you want to go to AWS or GCP anyway. So, Oracle, I think, is a weird dark horse. I don't think too much about it, but I get emails now and then from them like, "Hey, you want to maybe start working with us?" I'm like, I don't know. So,
yeah, apparently it's a big company. I don't know. I wonder. I guess my default assumption with the cloud oligopolies has been that it ends up being a race to the bottom and fairly equal. And I guess my reason for thinking that is it does feel like it's a commodity. I think there tends to be differences between them where one will come up with, I think Google, has sort of, they were sort of the first to, this is some really great compute tuned for machine learning for TensorFlow that's available in the cloud. And it's like, holy crap, that was like mind blowing. And then quickly everyone else is doing it. So there's occasionally, it's exactly the textbook example of perfect competition and commodity.
Right.
Something pops up, the others copy it. It is reduced to no difference. And so that part of me makes me feel like, yeah, it'll be commodity. It'll end up being a third. But then one thing that breaks out of commoditization is brand.
Yep.
And Microsoft seems that would support your thesis.
I think so. And the thing I'm waiting for is a company to drop egress fees, because I think that's going to set in motion a lot of very interesting scenarios. Yeah, it's going to happen at some point.
It's almost a little counterintuitive because you can imagine someone saying like, no, actually our egress fees should be enormous because we want the lock-in. We don't ever want you to leave.
It's like cell phone minutes in the late 90s or the early 2000s. So when you used to buy pack bundles of minutes, it's stupid.
Right.
The moment that you went to unlimited, everyone's like, cool, let's just do that and compete on other stuff. Egress fees, it locks you in, but with multi-cloud, I think becoming more and more of either a marketing story or a realistic one. I'm not sure which yet, but it's going to happen. I think that's going to be a big, big game changer. Because right now we have a lot of clients who are in a cloud who would love to do something in another cloud, and it's like, well, here's how much it's going to cost you if you do that. Right. Like, never mind. So
right. Well, other than the egress fees, there's very little downside. I think increasingly so. If you really wanted to build your architecture multi-cloud, there's some work, and by multi-cloud, I mean, multiple of the cloud oligopolies. There's some work you'd want to do up front, but lots of things like containerization, orchestration. There's a lot of stuff that abstracts away the complexity there. But everyone's multi-cloud if you sort of think about it in terms of, I use I'm all on AWS. Oh, except for Cloudflare and Snowflake and Redis and Mongo and
and G Suite.
Right, exactly. So eventually, everyone's kind of multi-cloud in a way.
Well, I see these stats like half the company. Wall Street Journal, I think it was like some number like making up like half companies are doing multi-cloud. I'm like, are they? Like, what does that mean exactly to you? That's a weird one.
I only believe that. Anyways, random intuition, but I would probably be more inclined to believe that if they're using a very broad definition, like I was just using, like as soon as you use Snowflake, you're multi-cloud. I'd believe 50%. I would not believe 50% of companies have
again hypothetical number,
Azure and GCP accounts at the same time.
Right, that doesn't make any sense.
50% seems high.
Well, yeah, I made up the number, but it was a number where I looked at it, I was like, that seems high. That doesn't seem right at all. That doesn't pass the smell test.
I do think there are a lot of, and this is a product that Pivotal was eventually building to solve this problem. And I think HashiCorp has done a lot to work on customers like this. But there are a lot of big companies where when they were sort of new to the cloud, again, engineers make their own decisions, and a lot of them were like, cool, I'm using the approved data centers. Actually, I just want to spin this up on AWS because it's easy, and someone does GCP and someone does Azure. And have a friend that took over as CTO at a Fortune 50 company, and that is a tech company that is not like sort of software IT tech, like real hard tech, like PhD tech. And he's like, I have no idea how this shit works. What should I do? He's like, I have all these unaccounted for things. I have no idea what the cost of our IT infrastructure is. It's on all these clouds. And I'm like, well, here's a link to Pivotal and a link to HashiCorp, and good luck. And it's like hire a consultant to start doing some inventory and start spinning you up on Terraform or PKS.
That's gnarly.
Or Cloud Foundry, I mean, but yeah. But I think that is common at companies of that size.
Probably, yeah. We see this, anecdotally. Just it's too big. How do you manage everything, right? So that's interesting. Kind of switching gears a bit. I mean, we talk a lot about like work and VC and stuff, but like, what makes you tick outside of the office? Like, what do you do when you're not, coding or, doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, when we had dinner, you in Salt Lake a few months ago, you saw I'm pretty big into wine. I got into a few years ago. Yeah, basically, I went out to dinner with a friend of mine who had some formal wine education and made like a really embarrassing wine order. I mean, if you don't know anything at all about wine, right? It's just like French words on a page, and you're like, what do I call this wine, right? He's like, oh, I'll order the Pinot Noir, I'll order the Grenache, or I'll order the Chateau Mouton Rothschild, or whatever. And like, it's all just words in a row, and I'm like, what am I supposed to say? And I was like, oh, I'll have the Chateau, and he's like, what? he didn't judge me. He's a nice guy, but I was like, I should learn enough about wine that I wouldn't accidentally do that in like a business context. So I started doing formal wine education. I went pretty far down that track. I did the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, WSET. So I did level 2 and level 3, and then started planning to do the 4, and COVID happened. And I don't think doing it remotely is a good idea, because so much of the tasting exam is really, you're going to want to be there in person, talk with other people. And so anyway, I plan to do the 4 at some point, which is basically kind of absurd, like 8 classes, kind of equivalent to doing like a.
Is that kind of like getting a black belt or something at that point?
I think it kind of is. I mean, and I think the thing, to be honest, so during the pandemic, during part of it, I lived on a winery, and wow. I think a lot of winemakers, sort of have different degrees of opinion about the sort of formal wine education. It's a lot of theory. It's funny, without, having read these books and lectures and passed this test and passed the tasting test or whatever, and I'm helping out the winemaker on the winery. I walk into the winery and I'm like, I should know a lot of shit, right? I spent a lot of time on this. I didn't even know where to start. And he's like, I'm like, I just want to help you. He's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I'll do like anything. And he's like, cool. Here's a mop. He's like, number one thing in winemaking is everything has to be clean. It's chemistry. So disinfect everything. And I'm like, cool. That was never on the exam. So there was just a lot of stuff like that all summer long. That's, it's funny, the theory and practice, right? And it's pretty humbling to have a ton of theory in your head and then fly face first into the brick wall of practice. It was,
wow,
good reminder.
It was impressive though. Yeah, you were to look at a Sarah's glass of wine and I think that it tell what it was. So something like that. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's like Rain Man level stuff. That's crazy. So
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I've seen people. It's so much fun to be able to do that. It's kind of annoying because I don't want to be like a show off with people, but it's always really, really fun. Because it's not that important. It's nothing to be that proud of. It's a lot of practice. But it's just so much fun. There's so many little clues, and it's a mixture of experience tasting a lot of wines of that kind, potentially that grape from around the world, or a lot of different grapes from that region, and then a lot of just knowledge. You might say well, possible, I think this is this grape from this region, but I know that this region doesn't actually grow that much of this grape, so it's unlikely. So you do a little bit of like deductive reasoning in your head while you're tasting. So I think it's really fun.
It's awesome. Man, it's something I know nothing about. So I would probably be the older version of you, just walking in and being, yeah, I'll have a whatever goes in a box, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's cool.
Yeah, we do a lot of wine. We do a lot of dinners at our office, and I tend to do the wine pairing. So we're a very scrappy firm. We're kind of like a startup. So when we do dinners, we have a commercial kitchen in the back of the office.
Oh, wow.
We're renting what used to be like a commercial kitchen space. Like it was a deli that or bakery that made its own stuff. And yeah, so we basically bring a chef in and have them like cook the meal and serve it. And then I do the wine pairings. Get your low rent sommelier, even though I'm a level or two below what you would potentially really call a sommelier, but
Get what you pay for.
yeah, you get what you pay for.
And in this case, it costs nothing because I work with you guys. So
Exactly.
that's awesome. Well, I think it's probably a good place to close out. It's been a lot of fun, man. Had a lot of good conversation. I think we always have good chats. So
Yeah,
maybe we'll have to do it again at some point. But yeah, for people who
Yeah,
want to learn more, what's that?
Oh yeah, hope you make it out here at some point, and I'll be
Love
back
to.
in Salt Lake as much as I can, trying to. Yeah, as you know, I'm super excited about especially the data community in Salt Lake right now.
Yeah, hit me up
A lot of
whenever you're
folks
here, man.
coming out of folks coming out of university, and I think coming out of really impressive companies. I think there'll be some awesome people who are early at Domo that are going to go start their next thing, and always want to meet those people. So I hope some of these people
I can make some
hit me up.
intros to you. You can make
Yeah.
some intros. I'm pretty tight in around here. So
Yeah, totally.
it's awesome, man. For people who want to learn more about you and Root, where can they go?
Yeah, root.vc is great. And then for my portfolio, it's all on my GitHub. So
Cool.
github.com/ledwards.
Of course, it's in your GitHub.
Yeah, it's all so there you can make a GitHub personal README now. One of my
that's
former
cool.
coworkers at Teespring, Mike Kavoris, it was like his random side project at GitHub where he just, if you name the repo a certain way and you make a markdown file, it'll make you like a homepage. Nobody's really using this yet. And I got feature flagged into it and was doing it while it was in beta. So that's my
cool.
homepage right now. My
That's awesome.
ledwards.com redirects to it. I think lee.af redirects to it also.
That is a pretty cool domain as well. So, well, awesome, man. Until next time, we'll catch you on the flip side. So,
Awesome.
and hit me up in your Salt Lake, man. I'd love to hang out. So,
Yeah, for sure.
all right. See you, Lee.
See ya.
Okay. Bye.